What if you couldn't tell soft truth from a tall tale, or stark echoes from a scream, daylight from a daydream? Suppose you couldn't sense cold fibers from warm flesh. Would you trade the time of your life away for the sand thread of yesterday? Now, if you're familiar with Pink Floyd, and this album in particular, Wish You Were Here, you'll get a feel right away for the fact that I basically adapted the structure of the most famous song from this album, and the name of the album is, of course, from that song, Wish You Were Here. And a lot of people have compared that song to the lyrics of Bob Dylan. Personally, I hear some of Mr. Allen Ginsberg in that song as well. At any rate, this album is, in my opinion, a pivotal album for Pink Floyd. They had, in many ways, finished the ultimate album, Dark Side of the Moon, and the band had finally broken free of financial, I guess you could say, uncertainty. And with Dark Side of the Moon, from this point on, the band and all of its members would be quite wealthy if they wanted to be. They'd be able to do whatever they wanted, and perhaps that is a difficult thing for a group of people that are held together by a very specific thing or a very specific idea, to find that they now have options, and each one of them has to figure out kind of where they're going to fit and what they really want to do. For that reason, I think this album is a very pivotal album, and I think if you research it more, you'll find that putting this album together is something that really brought the members of the band together. Roger Waters, Rick Wright, Nick Mason, and David Gilmour. At any rate, they worked together on this, and they each contributed in their own way. But the ghost of Syd Barrett runs through this album, and in this episode I want to tackle the idea of, did Syd Barrett wish you were here? Now, I'm not going to suggest necessarily, of course, that Mr. Barrett was directly involved in this album. For various reasons, I really suspect that he wouldn't be. Not least of which is that the song Shine On You Crazy Diamond kind of focuses on Mr. Barrett, and in a way it kind of, I don't know what you would say, morbidly glorifies him. And that's something that Mr. Barrett, in my opinion, wouldn't have been a part of. He was very much, if you go through his lyrics in our Peeling Syd Barrett series, you'll see he's the kind of person who makes assessments of how he's feeling and things that are happening, but he doesn't really seem to go out of his way to focus on overly positive aspects of himself. And this is displayed in his actions, of course, while he was a singer with the band, that he would often sing with light shows covering his features. And in that way, perhaps out of extreme shyness, or perhaps even humility, he would be more comfortable in presenting the material. At any rate, this particular album was recorded from January through July of 1975 and was released in September of 75 at Abbey Road. There are two things that I really want to discuss with this video. One is the fingerprints of the songs, and we'll get into that a little bit. We're going to tear apart the songs, we'll do a Syd score, and I want to get a feeling for how much influence perhaps Mr. Barrett had on this album. Now, that seems like an obvious thing because members of the band are very upfront that portions, at least, of this album are very much about Mr. Barrett. But I want to get into it a little bit more than that. I want to use our framework that we've developed around Mr. Barrett and apply it to 4 songs, and we'll see kind of how they look. And I want to discuss some of the nature of those songs, the themes of those songs and the lyrics, etc. And I also want to get into the most famous story about Mr. Barrett tied to this album, and that is, of course, that he showed up while they were going through putting the final touches on Shine On You Crazy Diamond. And that song was, of course, something that they had written about him for some reason. So there's different reasons why that may have been done, and we'll find out a little bit more about that as we go on. So there are 4 videos that I'm going to suggest that you watch before we discuss this. 2 of them I feel are quite necessary. The other 2, totally up to you. So the first one is Pink Floyd and Syd Barrett, Wish You Were Here, and that is posted by Rock and Roll True Stories. That's a short video. It's only about 5 minutes long. It shouldn't take too long to watch. The second video is called Pink Floyd on Syd Barrett by Musicounds. And that video is even shorter. It's only about 3 minutes long. And again, I would very much suggest that you watch that. That video is probably the most important one. If you're not familiar with the story of Mr. Barrett showing up to the recording at Abbey Road, that one kind of outlines it. And I think that's the most important one to watch. Another video that is much more material is the story of Wish You Were Here, and that's posted by Sokolova. And that video is quite long. I'm going to say it's more than 50 minutes or so. It's probably around 55 minutes long. The last video, I don't need you to watch the whole thing. It's basically a story of Pink Floyd 2010, and it's posted by Roy Navigator. And 10 seconds into that video, immediately is a quote that is of extreme importance, and perhaps that will be made a little bit more apparent to you kind of as we talk through this. So I'll give you kind of a sample and give you a feel for kind of what my mindset is, and perhaps you'll see where I'm going.
The only time I saw Syd Barrett was when he popped into the Abbey Road session when we were doing Out of My Mother.
Anyway, so what are the things that I would like to discuss? Well, first, hopefully you've had a chance to check out at least 2 of those videos. What I would like to do now is ask a few questions and then run through the videos, the notes that I made on the videos. Hopefully you've gone through and made video notes as well. Then I want to do Sid scores on the songs, the 4 songs. I want to discuss things about the album itself, and then we'll do some final things and some final notes that I mentioned. And this won't be really clean. I've organized it a little bit, but I still want to keep it a little bit organic and free-flowing so that it feels natural to me, and hopefully it comes across that way as we run through these topics. So the first video that I want to discuss is the one posted by Musicounds. And actually, let me run through the questions. So here's a few questions for me to ask you. Hopefully you're familiar with the story of Mr. Barrett showing up, and you're familiar now with a little bit of the background of what was happening and the idea that perhaps in some way the band is dedicating this album to him. If you're educated on the background now, we can kind of have a discussion about it. My first question is, do you believe it? It's a very simple question on its surface. Do you believe it? Do you believe everything that you're being told? And I'll ask you one very simple question that I think will make you realize what I'm saying. Do you believe that someone who is not totally coherent could just walk into Abbey Road Studios while Pink Floyd is recording an album and nobody would think anything of it? Do you think they would have access to that studio? Do you think they would have access to the building? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for a reason, because there has to be more to that story. What that is, I don't know. Perhaps we can kind of figure it out. But there's only so many options. One, any random person can just walk into Abbey Road Studios at any point in time and go and meet all the musicians, the best musicians in the world, at one of the greatest studios in the world, and just kind of hobnob with all these people. You can attribute whatever probability you want to for that on your own. For me, that is a minuscule probability. It simply cannot happen. especially since the Beatles had been recording at Abbey Road prior to this. So they would have had security standards of some sort. So there's only really two possibilities for this. Either Syd Barrett let himself in, or someone let him in. And if someone let him in, then someone must have had, or may have had, contact with him and let him know what kind of was happening this day. It's a very simple thing. But that one simple question, do you believe the story that this guy just kind of just shows up out of the blue? This is in 1974. Mr. Barrett hasn't been recording supposedly for years. His last album, entitled Barrett, was done recording in 71. He didn't really record any more material. You could argue that he had access to some degree prior to I don't know, 72. You could argue maybe he had old keys of some kind. But certainly he either is not an incoherent person and he is able to get in on his own, or someone's organizing this. Someone has told him that these kind of things are happening. They've invited him to come and share the day because this song, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, is kind of happening on this day. Or perhaps they just invited him and everyone associated him arriving with this song. I'm sure Shine On You Crazy Diamond wasn't finished in one day. I'm sure they spent many weeks working on Shine On You Crazy Diamond. Some people would just associate him being there with that song for obvious reasons. The average person would. But we're going to find out there may be more to that particular day. So another thing that kind of strikes me is that no one seems to really be recognizing him. Do you believe that? Certainly there's enough testimony there from enough people about the change in his appearance to make it seem like, yeah, he's very different in appearance, so it might be a little bit odd. And some people actually will find, are saying that they didn't recognize him until they were told. The question is, of course, does nobody at all there know that that's who that's who is the person that is there with them? I also want to discuss kind of from Mr. Barrett's point of view, why might he be there? And finally, let's discuss some of the meaning of the songs and some of the history of Pink Floyd and the history of Mr. Barrett and how that might be tying in with this album and establishing influences. So that sounds like a whole lot, but hopefully this won't take too long. So let's go ahead then and start going through my notes, and hopefully your notes are similar to some degree about these videos, and I just want to go through some of the main points. Now for the very first video, the Musicounds video, Pink Floyd on Syd Barrett, that's only about 3 minutes long, there are a few things that I've written down. I'm not going to go through everything. I just want to point out that about 30 to 45 seconds in, David Gilmour is speaking, and he says, kind of surprisingly, everyone is saying, "Who's that?" And you have to wonder, why is that surprising? And he asks the question, or he kind of makes the note, how long is it going to be before anyone kind of wakes up and sees that this guy is kind of wandering around? So it appears that Mr. Gilmour is aware of this individual and is noting that everyone else, notice that he says everyone is saying, but he doesn't use the word we, which is inclusive. He's saying everyone, which implies everyone else. So that's kind of a hint to me that perhaps Mr. Gilmour at least knows who this is early on. Finally, Nick Mason says specifically that David Gilmour says to him, "That's Sid, don't you recognize him, or do you recognize him?" And if David Gilmour is the one indicating to Nick Mason who that is, then David Gilmour knew, logically, David Gilmour knew before Nick Mason who that was. So Nick Mason obviously couldn't have really been involved with that. After that, Mr. Gilmour mentions that everyone was kind of shocked at his appearance. He says, now this time he says, "We were shocked at his appearance." So he also was shocked at his appearance. Now, I just want to point out that this time it's inclusive. So perhaps if Mr. Gilmore had invited Sid to come, he might not have known what Sid looked like, or what Sid had begun to look like. And just in case you haven't gone through this and aren't aware, Mr. Barrett had put on weight, and apparently he had shaved his hair. He shaved his eyebrows and the hair of his head, and was wearing a kind of an overcoat, and apparently carrying some form of a bag. Storm Thurgeson at about 1:28 says, specifically, I didn't recognize him. And for a long time, he didn't. After that, David Gilmour asks a few questions at about 2 minutes, 19 seconds. He mentions that losing Sid, or Sid was a great loss. You know, what could he have gone on to do? He could have been so great. So there are different ways of taking that, of course. You have to wonder if Mr. Gilmour is saying that the entire situation, or is he saying specifically that Sid is broken? And this is an important question. Is Sid actually broken? And many people, and I've had to deal recently with people that are kind of trolling the channel and saying, oh, he was just schizophrenic, and they'll throw these terms around loosely. And I've said in my Peeling Syd Barrett series, if you are not a trained professional, you have not had this person under your care and your direct observation, you can have your opinion, but it's just an opinion. I just want to deal with facts. Unless I have a report from a certified individual that is specifically discussing how they rated him under their personal observation in accordance with the DSM-5, and they didn't have the DSM back then, not in 1970. They had their own version of whatever they're putting together. The point is, without direct observation under a certified professional, everyone else's opinion is just simply that, an opinion. And a lot of people can have eccentricities. Every person, including myself, has certain things that other people might not consider to be normal about them. These are all weighted things. So the idea that perhaps Sid was completely broken or not is something that we really can't know. We can kind of evaluate what other people are saying about him, though. And in this case, perhaps Mr. Gilmour is just noting that there was a great loss there. So let's move on to the next video. And this is by Pink Floyd and Syd Barrett, Wish You Were Here, and that's posted by Rock and Roll True Stories. So one of the first notes I want to mention is that they mentioned kind of about 50 seconds in that Sid had become depressed and emotionally withdrawn. He had a drastic change in his personality. I want to point out in our Peeling Syd Barrett, we've specifically discussed whether or not there actually was a personality change. There are people who attest to him always being solitary and being someone that's withdrawn since he was young. So perhaps he's only portraying certain things. So at any rate, let's continue on. About 2 minutes and 20 seconds into that video, we have kind of an aha moment. They specifically mentioned that this day was June 5th, 1975, and on that day also was David Gilmour's marriage. Now, if you're not aware, David Gilmour is the one person in the group that had helped Mr. Barrett put together his 2 solo albums. Roger Waters helped with the first, and Rick Wright helped with the second. But David Gilmour was there throughout that, and David Gilmour also was helping Sid in other ways, including delivering or making sure that he was getting his royalty checks. So there is a little bit of possible loyalty from Syd Barrett to David Gilmour. And I've given my opinion in the Peeling Syd Barrett series, and I'll restate it here. This is my opinion, that David Gilmour really was the glue that held Pink Floyd together after Syd Barrett left. So David Gilmour getting married is a significant event, and it is possible that Syd Barrett wasn't there for the music at all. He may have simply been there to go to the reception for David Gilmour's wedding and the wedding. And he did attend the reception, at least for Mr. Gilmour's wedding, to some degree. Apparently he left without saying anything, and it's a little bit odd, but I've had friends that were like that would come and go as they pleased. They wouldn't be overly loud about arriving or say too much when they left. I used to surf a lot. I had a particular surfer friend that always was a little bit odd socially. And I have to admit that if you've ever been around surfers, that they're all a little bit odd. So for surfers to call someone else a little bit odd may give you an indication of the strangeness of this person. But I will say there's a little bit of social interaction that was always a little bit difficult for that individual. And but it was completely functional. It was a wonderful person. So apparently Mr. Barrett left that marriage or the reception without really saying too much. But he may have simply gone to support Mr. Gilmore or to show that he was happy for him. That may have been the thought process that was happening within Syd. I just want to give that possibility. Now, about 3.5 minutes in, Andrew King, who was a manager, mentions that Syd had gained a significant amount of weight and had mentioned that he was eating a lot of pork chops or that he had a refrigerator full of pork chops, something like that. So let's discuss that just for a minute. Now this is significant, of course, because Mr. Barrett was into yoga and was also doing a lot of Eastern philosophy and was involved with a lot of this. And one of the tenets of a significant amount of those religions is that you're supposed to be a vegan as much as possible and avoid meat, and in particular pork. So the fact that he is stating outright that he's gained weight and he's eating pork, that may be a roundabout way of saying that he's lost his religion. And in a way, this is a process that a lot of people go through. People that become disillusioned with kind of being very dedicated to an idea or to a religion or to a philosophy, and then finding that it's not giving them maybe what they were looking for. So perhaps that's a process that Syd is going through. I just want to throw that idea out there. I also want to point out something that a lot of people might not know, and that is that Pink Floyd had been working with a certain producer in the filming of their movies, and those two films were More and La Vallée. Now, the second album, which was for La Vallée, was titled Obscured by Clouds instead. And for some reason, the band kind of had a falling out with the production team that made this, and I believe Barbara Schroeder was the individual that put that film together. So you have to ask why. Why did they have a falling out? First off, why does a band that's making a soundtrack for a film feel that it's their kind of prerogative to say what the material of the film could be? And we've discussed More and how More may tie in with Mr. Barrett's personal story in our previous video entitled Did Syd Barrett More? The question I have is, what is in that film, La Vallée, which could be disturbing to Pink Floyd, which they might not approve of? And I don't know, but I will tell you something that I found disturbing. And it could be disturbing to a significant amount of people. And that is, in that film, they meet up with a native tribe, and they show the tribe slaughtering in a traditional fashion, slaughtering pigs. Now, some people are fine with that, and I get that. I'm just pointing out something that could be something that's generating some form of tension between the band and possibly people in the band, or people that are directing things and tying things together between the band and this film company that's putting together La Vallée. The idea of slaughtering animals live and filming it is something that's quite scandalous to a lot of people. That may have been something that drove a rift between them. And some people in the band may have been totally fine with that, and some people may not have been. This statement that Mr. Barrett makes, that he's now eating pork, could be a reference that he's now perhaps sorry. If you think he had something to do with that row between the band and the production of the film, etc. I've gone through my entire discussion in Peeling Syd Barrett and did Sid, etc., a number of things. One of the theories, of course, is that Mr. Barrett may have had a hand in the development of songs or helping with songs. The band, of course, is on record of saying they originally planned to have him on, helping to make music, particularly lyrics and organize material with them in a Brian Wilson kind of fashion. How long that lasted is hard to say, but we do know from chapter 24 that there were a number of coming and goings that are listed associated with chapter 24, and that if you organize the albums in the way that we've discussed previously, this would be the final entrance, and it would be disaster in accordance with the hexagram for 24 of the I Ching. And it is in fact disastrous in many ways for Mr. Barrett. And in many ways this is the last time that the band will ever see him. Let's continue on. At about 3.5 minutes in, there's mention of Mr. Barrett joining with guests at the Gilmore wedding for a little bit and then just kind of leaving. And that's about it. There's a few other notes by Mr. Waters about things, but I won't get into those too much. Now, for the long video that's posted by Sokolova, I'm just going to note a few things. Hopefully this won't take too long. The first is that about 2 minutes in, Rick Wright kind of mentions that this was put together to kind of be an homage to Sid and to kind of express admiration and loss of what he considered to be a great friend. Nick Mason, at about 2 minutes 40 seconds, mentions that they didn't want to write him out of history or let him be forgotten. An interesting statement, I think, from Mr. Nick Mason. I don't find him overly friendly in most of his interviews, but he does seem to at least be compassionate enough to ensure that he doesn't want Mr. Barrett to be forgotten, which I think is quite nice. And Rick Wright, at about 3 minutes and 10 seconds, says there are no generalities in this album. It is about Sid. David Gilmour mentions about 6.5 minutes in that after all the success that they had finally with Dark Side of the Moon, as I had mentioned, Dark Side of the Moon kind of set the band free. They really had to assess why they were in the music business. Were they simply going to be businessmen interested in making money, or were they going to make art? And about 7 minutes and 40 seconds in, there's kind of mentioned that Roger says that perhaps we're kind of finished, and maybe he had been right. So, as we mentioned, there is quite a bit of uncertainty about the future, and in a way, perhaps a need to express gratitude to Mr. Barrett. Now, here's a question that I want to ask you at this point. Why? Why do they feel the need to express gratitude to Mr. Barrett? And I don't mean generally. I mean right now. Right now, why does the band feel the need to express gratitude and memorialize Mr. Barrett? They have put out a number of albums since Mr. Barrett's been gone. Why are they doing this now? Well, they just finished Dark Side of the Moon. Dark Side of the Moon made them all very rich. It made them all very famous. Why are they wanting to express gratitude to Mr. Barrett now? Isn't that interesting? I don't know. You can make your own judgment if you so choose. But in Did Syd Barrett, Dark Side of the Moon, I went through in about a 4-part series and broke down Dark Side of the Moon and expressed the influences of Mr. Barrett. And if you think that it's possible Mr. Barrett helped develop Dark Side of the Moon, doesn't it make sense that perhaps they would want to express gratitude to Mr. Barrett after that was finished and had made everything come true for them that they had dreamed of? I'm not saying that's what happened, but it is very interesting. The timing of it all is very interesting, isn't it? So let's continue on then with our review of the videos. About 14 minutes and 20 seconds in, Uh, Rick Wright says that the one song is about Sid. The rest is kind of general. Uh, he mentions kind of being disillusioned with the music business and being a puppet and not being able to be your own man. Now, I have here written RW, but I believe that's Roger Waters actually is saying those things, if my memory serves me correctly. So let's consider those things. One song is about Sid, not the whole album. Does that make sense? It kind of does. Let's consider the listing. Have a Cigar, right? Perhaps influenced about the story of Sid. Wish You Were Here, obviously. These aren't in any particular order. Welcome to the Machine. And Shine On You Crazy Diamond. And I think most people would admit Shine On You Crazy Diamond is probably the song everyone attributes to Mr. Barrett. And we'll get into that a little bit more. The other three songs and the rest of the album then could be taken to be quite general, according to Mr. Roger Waters here. Does that make sense? I don't know. We'll have to break them down a little bit and see what's going on. I will point out that there are certain aspects of the songs that I find to be a little bit difficult to believe that they don't involve Mr. Barrett in some way. Okay, so about 16 minutes in, David Gilmour says that Sid's madness, quote, is partially caused by the demands of the record industry, and Nick Mason follows that up by saying that they had, as a group, put quite a bit of pressure on Sid to produce pop music for them. Now, 20 minutes in, I guess I should point out that those things all have to do with the idea of the machine, right? So we have Welcome to the Machine and the cover itself. We'll discuss the cover design later. But I just want to point out that that quite a bit of the stress that they're relaying is they're acknowledging that that's all things that Mr. Barrett had also kind of had to go through. Now, about 20 minutes in, and I didn't know this until I researched this and watched these videos, but they actually discuss Roy Harper singing the song Have a Cigar, which is funny to me. I always assumed that that was David Gilmour or Roger Waters, which was odd because I kind of knew that it sounded different. And I would argue with myself, who's singing this song? And I found out it was Roy Harper. Now, I don't know much about Roy Harper, but I have listened to some of his music, and I think he's great. And apparently, he's kind of one of the leads for the underground rock scene that developed around that time. Kind of funny, isn't it, that he would just kind of be there and would offer to sing this song for them. And I want to point out, if you listen to the actual recordings of the guys trying to sing Have a Cigar, they sound terrible. And that's funny because people had made fun of the way that Syd Barrett sang, but as I've mentioned before, I think Syd Barrett sings quite well. The point is, everyone can sound good or bad depending upon what kind of song they're trying to sing, how they're trying to sing it. But Roy Harper sounds really great in this song. Now, about 24 minutes in, Storm Thurgeson mentions the development of art that's tied to this particular album, and there are some art designs that are kind of strange. One is he specifically mentions this kind of yoga position in a lake where this person's diving into a lake, and I just want to point out, of course, that Mr. Barrett was known to be doing yoga. He's the one that's tied up with a lot of that philosophy. Who else is involved with that? Why is Storm Thurgeson using yoga in photographs? And I'm going to get into Storm Thurgeson, I guess, a little bit more later on, because he also eventually works significantly with someone like Peter Gabriel. But it is odd that, you know, we have these connections between something like yoga. Where's he getting this idea to use yoga? Explain that to me. I mean, what in this album makes you think of yoga? There's nothing in this album that makes me think of yoga. So why is a yoga position of a diver entering water coming to Mr. Storm Thurgeson? And of course, perhaps there's some kind of casual acquaintance there. We've already asked the question, did Sid have kind of a casual acquaintance within the studio that perhaps met with him, let him in. I'm not going to say that I feel that's the more likely one. I'm just going to say it's a possibility. And if he's keeping acquaintances and keeping contacts with some people, is it possible that he may have done so with Storm Thurgerson as well? We discussed the development of the Pyramid Prism cover for Dark Side of the Moon, and a number of people, including Domine, have mentioned, of course, the fractal effect on the original album, which also has to do with light passing through kind of a prism. So there's a connection there, and you have to wonder who's kind of responsible for these ideas in general. Just another question. I'm not saying I have answers, but I do have questions. Okay, so about 26 and a half minutes in, they mention working with Gerald Scarfe, who's kind of an artist that develops a significant amount of work here for video. And I believe he also works with them on some of the animated work for the wall. I'll get it. I'm going to try to do stuff on the wall later on, so I'll verify it at that point in time. But I believe I've seen some of this animation from the film The Wall. Now, one of the things that is mentioned is that Nick Mason kind of shows work to Roger Waters, and he kind of has early work called, I believe, Diary of Americana, which kind of shows Mickey Mouse just kind of degrading. And perhaps in many ways that's an attack on the idea of the American entertainment industry. I don't totally know. But I do know that David Bowie has a lyric about Mickey Mouse becoming a cow. So this Mickey Mouse idea that's tied to the United States, apparently by a lot of folks in the UK, or at least by this group, as representative of some aspect of America, which may be, I don't know, some kind of wide-eyed buy-in to capitalism or something, I don't know, or corporate greed, is being used and discussed. And we'll get into that, of course, because it also kind of is one of the possible themes that's relayed within the album cover itself, of the two men shaking hands, and one of them is on fire. About 33 minutes in, David Gilmour mentions the idea of the crazy diamond, and that certainly was Sid, and that he kind of wore out his welcome with random precision, etc. So I just want to ask the question here real quick. I mean, we've mentioned the prism, we've mentioned the fractal of the Piper at the Gates of Dawn album, and I didn't want to get into that too early on, but the comparison of Mr. Barrett to a crazy diamond, there's again that idea of crystal as things passing light through. So why are you telling a crazy diamond to shine on? That's kind of the same idea that's encapsulated in the Dark Side of the Moon cover and in the Piper at Gates of Dawn cover. Now, David Gilmour mentions, I'm going to say this is about 35 minutes in or so, that David Gilmour says that it's quite awful to think about what had happened with Sid, and you have to wonder, why is David Gilmour so upset? Why isn't everyone saying how upset they were? There is someone, I believe Storm Thurgerson, who mentions that some of the folks were crying, which is maybe in a way that's kind of good to hear. I don't know, but it is. I think it's noteworthy that David Gilmour is consistently kind of mentioning how much this is affecting him personally, and I don't get that from everybody, but you certainly do get that feeling from Mr. Gilmour. Just my own kind of interpretation of it. Now, about 43 minutes in, they have kind of this discussion about Welcome to the Machine and a Sea of Blood animation, which is a little bit strange to me because it's very similar to the concept that's used in the film The Shining. And there's an obelisk that kind of is involved with this, and that of course reminds me of Space Odyssey. So there seems to be these kind of themes that relate to very big movies, and I have to wonder if that's kind of happening within that animation, but you'll just have to kind of decide that on your own. Now, the final thing that I kind of want to point out is that the Roy Navigator video, Story of Pink Floyd 2010, posted by Roy Navigator, about 10 seconds in is all it takes, and you can hear very specifically this.
The only time I saw Syd Barrett was when he popped into the Abbey Road session when we were doing Atom Heart Mother.
And that's enough for me now, and hopefully I'll be able to load that up. But if I can't get it to load up, basically it says, the only time I saw Syd Barrett was him passing through the studio when we were recording Atom Heart Mother. So that to me is a dead giveaway. This isn't a one-off thing. And of course, Atom Heart Mother was much earlier, so that's around the time when Syd Barrett was still recording material. But why would he feel free enough to just kind of pass through the studios that Pink Floyd was working in? Is he working with them on other things? Was he helping with Atom Heart Mother? Why isn't anybody mentioning that he had passed through before in Atom Heart Mother? He didn't just show up for this studio recording of Wish You Were Here. Obviously, he had done so previously for other albums. So how significant is it really that he's kind of showing up? Obviously, the impression is simply that they had not seen him for quite some time. So perhaps that was a little bit shocking to them. I also want to point out that I don't really know who the guy is that's relaying this. I don't know if he's just one of the sound crew or someone else. I don't recognize him. But perhaps they weren't aware that Mr. Barrett had been kind of passing through. Maybe he's coming through late at night. I don't know. So at any rate, those are kind of some of my notes on these topics from those videos. So hopefully now we kind of have a little bit better idea of a few of the questions that we had asked. Does it make sense that Mr. Barrett may have been around or been able to get access into the room? Yes, he had done so before. Did he let himself in, or does he have access to someone else? I don't know. Based on Mr. Gilmore's word choices, I will say that I'm a little bit suspicious that Mr. Gilmore didn't invite him to come. And there's another reason why Mr. Gilmore might have invited him. He might have invited him because of the wedding. So perhaps Mr. Barrett came to hang out with him, to, just kind of be around and then go with him to the wedding afterwards. A very common, simple answer. It doesn't have to have a lot of ridiculous kind of mystery and all these superstitious, ridiculous ideas tied to it. It could just be very simple. They had kept in touch to some degree. Mr. Barrett knew he was getting married and decided to show up and hang out with him for the day. Big deal. Okay, so let's continue on then. I think what I would like to do... Oh, one last thing. And I didn't really get into this, but some people believe that Mr. Barrett deliberately was trying to kind of goon it up a little bit, I guess you could say, to kind of play a joke on everybody. And we've discussed his sense of humor as being a little bit twisted, but quite well planned and quite dry. So the idea is, of course, that perhaps he knew something about this song, and so he just kind of went along with it and tried to make himself look goofy and a little bit disturbing. And I think based on the photo that's associated with his that was taken of him at the studio, most people would kind of have that reaction. I just want to point out that I'd like to see another one. That there may be something to it. There are not very many photos of Mr. Barrett, being this goofy. So, I mean, is it just a one-off? You know, where's the trend? Where are the multiple occurrences? Perhaps there are none. Perhaps this is something that was happening at the time. I also want to point out a few things about the shaved head and the shaved hair. It is also possible that he did this simply because this is something that a lot of monks do in the East, particularly Buddhist monks. They will ritually shave. I don't know that that's what's going on, but it's a practice of cleansing the person, so perhaps that's what's going on. Of course, that would contradict the idea of the eating pork chops statement. So maybe there's something else going on. I also want to point out something that most people won't recognize, and that many people continuously state how good-looking Mr. Barrett was when he was young. But it's quite apparent that as he aged, he was losing his hair. And that's something that a lot of people, so I'll just talk about myself, all right? My father lost his hair relatively young. So I didn't really grow up expecting to have a full head of hair. I have more hair than he does, but I never really had an expectation of being a really great-looking guy when I got older and having this immaculate hairstyle that everyone kind of... I never had that pressure on me, but imagine being someone that's judged by how you look, and of course a lot of people constantly refer to as being good looking, but yet now you've lost your hair. Perhaps that's something that impacted Mr. Barrett in certain ways. I don't know, I'm just kind of throwing that one out there. That would be a reminder, of course, that he's no longer young. And for some people that's a big deal, you know, for some people it's not, but I just throw that one out there. So at any rate, we've kind of gone through a number of ideas. Let's go ahead then. I'm going to run through the songs themselves. We've done our video notes. Let's do our Syd scores, and then we'll finish up with a few last thoughts, and we'll be done for today. So the first one I want to run through is Shine On You Crazy Diamond. So if you can, pull up the lyrics on your phone or something like that and just kind of follow along with me. I'm not going to go through the music on this album too much. I will say that most of the members of the band, you can run through interviews, you can see that they all agree that they were very much into this album. They feel it was a very cooperative process. And based on the music itself, it's really heavy with Rick Wright's organ playing. And David Gilmour's guitar work is, I think, excellent. This is some of his best feel added kind of guitar playing up to this point in time. It's really quite wonderful. And of course, some lyrics and a lot of the noises, of course. Roger Waters was kind of a tinkerer with noises. A lot of the noises are pretty cool and appropriate to the topic and the theme. So it's really well put together, and I think they are justified in saying that it was cooperative and well made. So they seem quite proud of this album. And I'll just point out again now, that's a little bit odd, since Dark Side of the Moon was a great album. At any rate, let's go through the lyrics, okay? So the first is Shine On You Crazy Diamond. Do you remember when you were young and you shone like the sun? Who could that be about? Of course, that could be about Mr. Barrett. That ties in directly with kind of his life story. So I'm going to give a point for that. There's a mention of Shine On You Crazy Diamond. We've gone through the many variations of diamond, crystal, light, etc. So that's another point I'm going to give. So we're at 2 points. I won't do that for each line of Shine On You Crazy Diamond. There's a mention then of a look in the eyes that are like black holes in the sky. That's another point, obviously. Many people have referenced Mr. Barrett's blank stare. There's a mention that this person was caught in the crossfire of childhood and stardom. That obviously would be another possible reference to Mr. Barrett. I just want to mention that all of these guys are potentially caught in that same crossfire. Particularly, I guess you could say Roger Waters, because he becomes a star after Mr. Barrett is gone and kind of becomes the leader of the band. Now the last bit of this verse is come on, blown on the steel breeze. So being blown or flying is constantly mentioned in Mr. Barrett's songs, so I'll give another point for that. Why is the breeze steel? I really don't know, other than alliteration. But other than that, I don't know why you would say it's a steel breeze. Now, normally I go through and look for alliteration. There's black holes, like black holes in the sky. I'm assuming, of course, that this isn't in some way helped to be written by Mr. Barrett or influenced directly by him. And I've mentioned why already, because this is directly dealing with him. And so I kind of don't think this is the kind of song that he would have personally written. That's just my opinion. But so I'm not going through and looking for the hand of Mr. Barrett in the lyrics themselves. I don't see any really, really strange word combinations like he likes to use. The next bit mentions that this person is a target of faraway laughter. So that is, again, something that applies to Mr. Barrett. They mention that he's a stranger. Interesting. Certainly, Mr. Barrett had become a stranger, so that's another point. They mention that he's a legend. Perhaps at that time, Mr. Barrett was a legend. I'll give another point. Martyr is a significant one because of the religious tone to it. And we've gone through in our Peeling Syd Barrett series and specifically mentioned the religious tone and background of a lot of his lyrics. The last bit is that they should shine. So, and I want to touch on this a little bit once we're done with this. But at any rate, I'll give one more point because the shine has to do with light, and the idea of this light kind of shining is consistent with a lot of Mr. Barrett's music. So the next verse mentions that they reached for a secret too soon and cried for the moon. I suppose so. I don't know what they mean by reach for the secret too soon. I don't know what the secret could be. The secret to life, I suppose. So trying to find the secret to life, the meaning of it all. Certainly Mr. Barrett was struggling with a lot of these ideas. This specifically is kind of called out in a song like Opal. I'll give another point for that, so I'm at 11. Threatened by shadows at night? A little bit of paranoia there. A lot of people have given stories of Mr. Barrett being a bit paranoid, so I'll give one more point. How this person would know that Mr. Barrett may have been threatened by shadows at night, I don't know. That's a little bit disturbing to think about. That I believe these lyrics are written by Mr. Roger Waters. Oh, it says songwriters are Gilmore, Waters, and Wright. So I don't know who specifically wrote these lyrics, but they apparently had knowledge that perhaps Mr. Barrett was suffering from paranoia or was dealing with the fear of night. Exposed in the light. I don't know what exposed in the light could possibly mean. The next line is that they wore out their welcome with random precision. So I'll give another point for that. And that specifically would tie in with a story like Have You Got It Yet? And we've gone through that in our Peeling Syd Barrett series. I think it was episode 35 or something like that. The next line is that you should come on as a raver, a seer of visions. Quite interesting. Mr. Barrett often references dreams and visions, so I'll give another point. I'm at 14. And it says, come on, you painter. Mr. Barrett's certainly a painter. A piper. There's another point, so I'm at 16. And, of course, the piper at the gates of dawn. And in our Did Sid Led Zeppelin 4, we mentioned that within Stairway to Heaven is a specific mention of a piper. Here, again, is a reference of a piper. They're specifically calling him a piper, or the piper. So, in the same way, Mr. Bob Dylan was a joker, or called the Joker, Mr. Barrett may be known as a piper. So when you see songs referencing a piper from this era, they may be referencing Mr. Barrett. You'll have to decide whether they are or not. Interesting word choice for the next bit. They call him a prisoner. A prisoner of who? A prisoner of what? I really don't know. Perhaps a prisoner of their own mind. perhaps a prisoner of their own body, a prisoner of their situation, etc., and shine. I won't give a point for the prisoner line. I don't totally get that. But at any rate, I have a score of 16. Now, I want to ask you a question, and I want to get to the theme and the intent of this song. So supposedly this was to pay homage to Mr. Barrett and to express gratitude and to express perhaps to express some sadness at the loss of Mr. Barrett. There are some lyrics here that are not kind. Particularly the idea that you wore out your welcome with random precision. That could be taken quite badly. That could be taken to say that you wore out your welcome, so we got rid of you. Now, Mr. Barrett at this time, I don't know if they knew that much about him. I don't know what all was going on in his life, but he certainly wasn't famous anymore like they were. So why make a mean-spirited statement like that? Unless it's not intended to be mean-spirited. And this is kind of an odd one to think about, but if in some way perhaps the person that wrote this lyric recognized that Mr. Barrett perhaps wanted to wear out his welcome, it wouldn't be mean-spirited then. It would simply be a recording of a process that went on and an understanding of it, which would make sense if there was kind of a deal that had been going on. And I would argue that that's quite possible. I would say that in evaluating Mr. Roger Waters based on his interviews, he seems like a very straightforward person. I don't think you would want to cross him. I don't think he's a fool. And I don't think he's the kind of person that would back down very easily. He seems to be quite a stubborn, willful, thoughtful, opinionated person, and he's opinionated with fact and is capable of defending himself quite well. So based on that, you have to ask the question, is he a bully? And I don't think so. I think actually Mr. Roger Waters is the kind of person that would defend weak people. I don't think he's the kind of person that would pick on weak people. So what is the intent of these lyrics? What's the intent of Shine On You Crazy Diamond? Why would someone be beckoning or willing someone to shine on if they thought they were broken? Just think about that for a moment, okay? That would be like me asking someone who was perhaps handicapped or paralyzed to come on and run. Let's run. When they can't. That would be mean-spirited. Why are they asking Mr. Barrett to shine if he can't shine? Is it because he can shine and they know it? What do they mean by shine? Do they mean let your light out, let people recognize that you're shining? That certainly is one way of looking at it. Another way is, of course, that perhaps the pop ideas that he just was hidden away for whatever reason and nobody could get to him. But the understanding of Mr. Barrett's situation and his mentality, if it was completely broken, why would anyone think that he could shine, and why would you ask him to shine? Just want to ask that question. It seems to be pointing to the opposite, that the person who wrote this song is pointing out that perhaps Mr. Barrett did actually wear out his welcome on purpose, and that he's capable of shining but is choosing not to, or perhaps is shining in his own way. And if he wanted to be the kind of person that was just kind of a kingmaker in the background, you'd have to say, well, then I guess that perhaps makes sense. You'll have to decide that on your own. That's just a few questions I have about the theme of that Shine On You Crazy Diamond. And that is, of course, as we mentioned from the videos that we've watched, that is the song that the band recognizes as being tied directly to Mr. Barrett. So let's look at Welcome to the Machine. Has a lot of industrial kind of noises. Frankly, it reminds me quite a bit of 9 Inch Nails in a way. But let's look at the lyrics for Welcome to the Machine, and we'll give it a Syd score. So, welcome my son to the machine, and it says, where have you been? And we know where you've been. A little bit creepy, kind of a little bit paranoid. I guess I'll give a point for that. Now, I'm looking for things that may be alliteration, etc. There was some in Shine On You Crazy Diamond, but I haven't seen any in this song yet. It mentions that this person's been in a pipeline filling time, provided with toys, and scouting for boys. Now, I don't know. Now, this says the songwriter is Roger Waters. I don't know if Roger Waters was in the Scouts. I know that Syd was, so I'm going to give a point. So I'm at 2 points. And that this person bought a guitar to punish their mom. I don't know. Again, Roger Waters and Roger Syd Barrett both were brought up by their mothers. So this could be either or. And I don't know necessarily that Mr. Barrett would want to punish his mother. I think that he actually... I don't know. I'm not going to give a point for it. It's too hard. Now, the next line is quite telling. You didn't like school. Okay. And you know that you're nobody's fool. Okay, so didn't like school is an interesting one because from what I can gather from my research of Mr. Barrett, he actually was very well liked in school and did quite well in school. So perhaps there were aspects of it that he didn't like, but I think there were quite a few aspects of it, including that a number of teachers seemed to like him and be willing to help him, that it doesn't really make sense. In fact, the rebellious one in school was apparently Roger Waters. So this actually makes sense for Roger Waters. So you're nobody's fool. Well, there is someone who quite often... I don't know, I could attribute that to either one of those gentlemen, frankly. Welcome to the machine. Now, then the next bit that repeats and it says, what did you dream? So I'm going to give a point for that because Mr. Barrett often references dreams, and it says it's okay, we told you what to dream. The next is, you dreamed of a big star. Mr. Barrett constantly references stars, but immediately that line is followed up with, he played a guitar. So he's not talking about an actual star, he's talking about a rock star. And Mr. Barrett does not discuss stars in the terms of rock stars. He actually discusses stars in the terms of stars themselves, or in many cases, spirits. So again, it doesn't fit, and in fact, you could, in my opinion, you could actually take away points. This song is quite clearly written, in my opinion, by Mr. Barrett, by Mr. Waters. Let's continue on though. Always ate steak in a bar. Like to drive a Jaguar. Welcome to the machine. I guess. I have a Syd score of 3. I actually think it could be lower if I took away points for the obvious references to Mr. Waters' life. I could end up with a score of 1, frankly. So I think this is very, very much a song that's written by Roger Waters, and you can kind of tell by the word choices and the structure that it's extremely linear and simple. It has some interesting kind of ideas in it, but most of it is completely alien to topics that Mr. Barrett has covered. So let's move on to Have a Cigar. Now this, as we mentioned, is a song that was sung by Roy Harper because the other guys in the band couldn't really kind of capture the voice that they were looking for. I won't say that they can't sing because I think that pretty much everybody can sing. They just sing in a certain range, in a certain way. So, Have a Cigar. It says, come in here, a dear boy, have a cigar, and you're going to go far. Again, very simple word choices and rhyming of cigar with far. Okay, you're going to fly. I believe there's a fly high, actually, but whatever. I'm going to give a point for that because Mr. Barrett often references flying. There's a mention that they're never going to die. You're going to make it if you try. I suppose, again, very simple, very linear, very direct, as Mr. Waters often is. and it finishes with "They're Gonna Love You." A little bit of odd timing there, actually, which is kind of a Barrett thing. Perhaps that's just Roger Waters finally developing some interest in timing. I don't know of lyrical timing. But I'll give a point for that. So that would be an indication of some Barrett influence. The person goes on to say that they have a deep respect and they mean it sincere. And the band is fantastic. That's what they think. Which one's Pink? Very, very simple delivery. Very simple lyrics. There's really not much going on. There's no interesting word combinations whatsoever. There's even very extremely limited alliteration. And the rhyming is also quite happenstance, I guess you could say. Which one's Pink? Oh, I'll give a point for the color. So the color pink is mentioned, so I'm at 3. And they say, did we tell you the name of the game? Boy. And they call it Riding the Gravy Train. There's a reference of a train, which Mr. Barrett has kind of referenced before in See Emily Play with the picture that he drew. So I'm at 4 points now. I just want to point out that this is quite condescending, and from the point of view of whoever this person is that's talking to this boy. So in this way, perhaps relaying a deep dissatisfaction with the music industry or some people affiliated with the music industry. And of course, that may be covered in the image of the cover itself. But you have to kind of wonder, I mean, where's this coming from now? Do you follow what I'm saying? This, perhaps it's honest now because they have the freedom to be honest, but they've made, 6, 7 albums by this point in time, so why all this resentment being expressed now to the industry? Especially since they actually are riding the gravy train now, aren't they? With Dark Side of the Moon, they're set for life. So why all the resentment? I mean, they finally made it out. Anyway, let's continue on with the lyrics. They say that they're knocked out and they heard about a sellout, so got to get an album out and you need to do it for the people, and they're happy they can hardly count. Okay, so there perhaps is an answer to this. This actually is the pressure perhaps that's put on them because everyone is now just flush with money and is perhaps greedy for even more. So this is funny. It reminds me of the story of Montezuma and the Spaniards when he would send them gold to make them go away. And it just made them want more gold. So they continued on to, what was it, Tenochtitlan, or I can't recall exactly. But or modern day Mexico City, basically. The point is, if you give people what they want, that doesn't necessarily make them happy. It just makes them more of what they want. Makes them want more of what they want. Okay, everyone else is, let's continue on. Everyone else is just green, so there's a color reference and tying it in, I guess, with the idea of greed. A mention of a chart, it's a hell of a start. They want to make it into a monster if they can pull together as a team and ride the gravy train. At any rate, I end up with a score of 5. The song is incredibly simple lyrically. I have trouble attributing that to Mr. Barrett. So let's finish then with the song that I think most Pink Floyd fans absolutely love, including myself. I think it is Dylan-esque to many degrees. As I mentioned, it does remind me of Ginsberg, in particular because it mentions kind of a steel rail. This is the centerpiece of the album. In my opinion, this is the most beautiful part of the album. Excluding one thing from Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which I'll get to in just a moment. So let's go ahead and take a look at this then. So it starts off with, do you think you can tell heaven from hell? Now, that is a quick rhyming. Heaven from hell. There is alliteration there. I'll give 1 point for that. And I'll give No, I'm not going to give a point because you don't know which came first. But at any rate, I just want to point out that there's a mention here of heaven and hell. And of course, the cover involves someone being on fire, shaking hands with someone who isn't. And of course, many Christians would associate the idea of burning flames with hell. So that little bit is interesting to me. It makes me wonder if the idea of the flames doesn't, in fact, have something to do with heaven and hell. I don't know. You'll have to kind of decide that on your own. If that is kind of what's going on, then the person wouldn't be on fire because they're getting burned. What would actually be relayed there would be the other person getting burned by the devil, because the devil would be the person on fire and could represent the industry itself, of course. The next line is Blue Skies from Pain. Now, there's many, many mentions by Mr. Barrett of blue skies, all alone in the sky's all blue. Now, the next line is a green field. So a color and a field outdoor reference. I'll give 2 points. I'm at 4. From a cold steel rail. The steel rail reference is consistent with Mr. Barrett. He has mentioned steel rail in at least one of his other songs I can think of. I'll give you the name of the song here. A smile from a veil. Now, this idea of a hidden smile or a false smile is also conveyed in Mr. Barrett's music. I'll give another point. So I'm at 6. Do you think you can tell it ends up with? And did they get you to trade heroes for ghosts? I'm not entirely certain what that's all about. Trade your heroes for ghosts. Hard to say. I don't see too much lyrically going on. The imagery I don't think ties in with too much. Hot ashes for trees. Mr. Barrett consistently references trees. Hot ashes for trees would, of course, be a dead tree, a destroyed tree burned. Hot air and a cool breeze for a cool breeze. And cold comfort for change. What could be meant by cold comfort for change? Now, there is alliteration right there. I'll give a point for that. Cool comfort, cold comfort for change. Cool breeze is mentioned in the line just above that, or just preceding that. Well, there is someone who obviously doesn't want to deal with change and is interested in cool comfort. Cool, lazy, relaxed comfort. And then a question asked about a person exchanging a walk-on part in a war for a lead role in a cage. Now, I have to admit, previously took this to be a reference to war, as in the actual war, and that what's being discussed is kind of a reference to the father of Roger Waters. So that certainly could be the case, but I just want to point out that life can be viewed as a war, and that a walk-on part in a war for a lead role in a cage. Well, who's living in a cage? In many ways, Mr. Barrett went on to live in a cage, I suppose you could say, hidden away in dark rooms alone by himself. At least that's the impression most people seem to have had. So, I don't know. A walk-on part in the war, of course, could be the great struggle between the actual act of generating music and generating art within an industry that is kind of has animosity towards artists, or at least makes life difficult for them. At any rate, this line is a very interesting line. The idea that you exchanged a walk-on part in a war for a lead role in a cage. I can't necessarily attribute that directly to Miss Barrett. I'm just going to go ahead and move on. Line 8. Or, I'm at 8 points. Let's move on to the next line. How I wish you were here. Okay, who? Wish who were here. The implication is, of course, that this is about Mr. Barrett, wishing that Mr. Barrett is here. But I just want to point out that a number of band members say that the song that's about Barrett is Shine On You Crazy Diamond, and the rest of it is just general. So, who isn't there that could be there? Now, the songwriters are referenced to be Roger Waters and David Gilmour. Who are they missing? I guess Syd Barrett, you could say. But let's look at the next few lines. There's a mention that we're two lost souls and we're swimming in a fish bowl. Now that's big, because the fish reference is consistently made by Mr. Barrett, and it's made in a song like Terrapin, and where he specifically says bumping, rubbing noses, dodge a tooth, fins are luminous. And he seems to be relaying the idea of being a fish that's kind of swimming around. And that song also is a song that seems to be relaying this idea of being separate but being two lost souls, and includes this imagery of fish. So I'm going to give another point for that. I actually feel like I could give 2. I think I will, because of the fish reference and the soul reference, so I'm at 10. Now, running over the same old ground have we found. So there's our ground, around, found. That's a combination that Mr. Barrett likes to use. I'm at 11. Same old fears, wish you were here. So who has fears? Mr. Barrett has fears. I'm going to give another point for that. I don't know that Roger Waters is a very fearful person. He doesn't impress me to be that way. Neither does Mr. Gilmour, frankly. So I'm going to give a Syd score of 12 for Wish You Were Here. Mid-range, but much more than the other 2 songs, Have a Cigar and Welcome to the Machine. So I don't know why Wish You Were Here. It does seem to be something that a lot of people would associate with Mr. Barrett, or a discussion to Mr. Barrett. I just want to point out, of course, that Mr. Barrett did Bob Dylan blues. We know he was a fan of Bob Dylan. This is kind of a Dylan-esque song, and it scores pretty highly on the Syd Barrett score list. So, I don't know. Take from that as you will. Obviously, Shine On You Crazy Diamond is a song that's directly referencing Mr. Barrett, so we have a score of 16, which is relatively high, but that's to be expected. Why is this particular song showing, or appearing to show, so many influences of Mr. Barrett? You'll have to decide that on your own. But I will say that if there's a song on here that looks like Mr. Barrett might have had a hand in contributing to, perhaps it's this one. Now, the only other thing that I want to kind of point out is that Mr. Rick Beato, and I don't know if you're familiar with Mr. Rick Beato, but he does a lot of breakdowns on songs. He has an episode on the Hendrix chord, and I'll link the Hendrix chord episode here. And he doesn't seem to notice something. He runs through this interesting Hendrix chord, and he runs through other people that have used the Hendrix chord. And I believe he mentions that song is used in Hey Joe. Or it's either Hey Joe or Red House. I can't remember which one. At any rate, very early songs of Hendrix. And that same chord is used on Shine On You Crazy Diamond. And he mentions that it's used by David Gilmour on this album and in that song. So that's quite an interesting idea, that perhaps a song that's referenced to Mr. Barrett might be using a chord that's tied to Mr. Hendrix. Perhaps that's just coincidence. I don't know. You'll have to decide. But of course, Pink Floyd with Syd Barrett, without David Gilmour, but with Syd Barrett, did tour for a little while with Jimi Hendrix, and this is towards the end of '67. So, quite certain Mr. Barrett would have been aware, if he was paying attention at all, and there are reasons to think he may have, that he may have noted, some of the chords that Mr. Hendrix was using. And I don't know, you think about that. You make up your own mind about that as you will, but it's just kind of an interesting kind of a connection, I think, between the guys. So I guess that's pretty much it. I mean, we've run through the cover art. We've made the linkages there. There is one last thing I guess I could say about the cover art. So we've mentioned two possible ideas. I'll give you one more for the cover art, and then I'll finish up with one last thing. Okay. So for the cover art, the guy getting burned by the other one, obviously, and there's a sewer like right in front of him, and it's quite obvious what the sewer reference could mean. But the two men and one of them burning, we've mentioned two possibilities. One is one guy's getting burned by the machine, so he's on fire because he's getting burned and taken advantage of. And there, if you watch the interviews, they kind of mention that in the videos that I reference. Another possibility is, of course, that you have heaven and hell, and possibly that people are making a deal with the devil, metaphorically. Who knows? Maybe both of those things are being referenced at the same time. I don't know. The third one that I just want to point out is, of course, that Mr. Barrett did, of course, write a song called Flaming. So this also could be someone shaking hands with Mr. Barrett, represented as someone flaming. Just want to point out that that is a possibility in my mind. Whether or not that's happening, you'll have to decide on your own. I don't know. And I also want to point out one last thing. And I guess this will be the last thing I'll point out before I move on to my last topic. Typically, when you see people shaking hands, it's either a greeting or it's a farewell. Everyone assumes here that there's some kind of a deal happening here, or that it's perhaps a greeting and a shake on a deal or something like that. I want to point out that it also could be a farewell. And perhaps that would explain the meeting with Mr. Barrett, the kind of garish appearance, the falling out, the last time that these guys would see him. This is the last time most of these guys are ever going to see Mr. Barrett. And perhaps this is represented in the cover of two men, and who knows who those two men may be. But as I mentioned, the song Flaming and the psychedelic possibilities of it, and how that could be a reference to Mr. Barrett, this could actually be a farewell song to Mr. Barrett, to thank him and to say goodbye. So there's a lot of information that's tied up in this. You'll kind of have to make up your mind what you think makes sense. I do want to say that I think many of these possibilities could be happening together. I don't know. But these are the questions I have. And the last thing that I kind of want to point out is that I gave a reference to a lot of the people that regularly support my channel and give me ideas, and I can bounce ideas off of them. And in this video, I've already referenced an idea that Domine gave me. And I want to thank Domine for their latest comment. And the reason for that is because, as I mentioned, I was dealing with some people that were kind of being difficult. And I found myself asking this question, like, if every day half of the people that I interacted with were negative or made me not want to be around people, would I still want to be around people? What if 1 in 10 people were difficult to be around? Do you know what I'm saying? And what if one person was positive enough to affect me? Would that be enough to make up for a lot of other things that had gone wrong? I don't know. Everyone's different. But I do want to say thanks to Domine, because for me anyway, I was kind of starting to flounder a little bit. And when I read through their comments, they were very positive. And that was enough to kind of get past the negativity in my mind for this particular episode and for this particular time, to continue on and to finish up this work. So in a way, I guess you could say Domine helped me get this particular episode done. So I would like to thank them. And that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will talk to you folks later.